Oh, thank you all for tuning in to another edition of Outside the Shop with me, your host, Daryl D. Lane, as always, where I get to talk about everything that I normally don't get to talk about on my regular sports podcast, Barbershop Sports Talk, which, by the way, can be found on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, or any other podcasting apps or platforms you may listen to. Gonna have record a good pod today. Gonna have Kenny Simon, scouting expert for 247 Sports. Me and Kenny usually do the podcast. We record it on Sunday nights when we recap everything that happened in the NFL. But Kenny had some stuff to do, so we're going to record it tonight after the game. Steelers versus Bengals, so be on the lookout for that. Now, what I want to get into is this. So, AFC East craziness. If I told you that there's a world where the Bills and the Dolphins have a better record than the New England Patriots, you would have said, Daryl, that's insane. And that's what we're saying. And then if I told you a world, not only that, are they better teams? If I told you the Bills and the Dolphins have better quarterbacks than the Patriots, and the Patriots still have a former league MVP, right? Cam Newton's not Tom Brady, but Cam Newton won a league MVP in 2015. Like, Cam Newton's just not a nobody, but he's had 5 touchdowns, 10 interceptions on the year. He has been awful. So I think it's just really interesting, a really cool and unique changing of the guard, and it makes me wonder, where does New England go from here, right? I thought they should have maybe tried to trade up in the draft last year for a Tua Tagovailoa, or maybe a Joe Burrow, a Jalen Hurts, somebody like that that's young and can come in, right? And we're seeing right now, Tua's better than Cam, which is kind of crazy to think, but I think that's where we're at, and I think there's a lot of soul searching that's going to be going on in New England, right? The Bills had a big win against the Broncos. You have the Dolphins who beat the Patriots, and the Patriots are now eliminated from the playoffs. So definitely some soul searching for Bill Belichick and co. up in Foxborough. Now I want to get to this. So things get ugly in Philly. So Doug Peterson was asked who's going to be the starting quarterback for next weekend, and Doug Peterson said Jalen Hurts, of course. Now this is in the aftermath of Carson Wentz and probably his people leaking out that he could potentially want a trade, right? If he's not going to be named the starter for next year, he doesn't want to be there. And I think this could get into a very toxic, dicey scenario. And this is how I equate it, right? Because people are always like, why can't Carson Wentz just be a good teammate and support Jalen Hurts? And here's what I'm going to say. It'd be like you have an actor. They're going to play Batman. It's a huge budget film. And midway through them filming the movie, they say, hey, you can't be Bruce Wayne. You can't be Batman anymore. We don't like what you're doing. So how about we have your stunt double replace you? And by the way, we're going to keep you under contract, so you have to help him learn his lines and play the role. How do you think that would go over? Well, at the end of the day, like, people have egos. Carson Wentz was almost a league MVP one year. Like, Carson Wentz was the 2nd overall pick in the NFL draft. Like, Carson Wentz is somebody, and he thinks he's somebody. Right? So I just think this could get very dicey with somebody who doesn't want to give up what he has versus a guy in Jalen Hurts who's kind of taking what he has. And Jalen Hurts has been playing fabulous, threw for over 300 yards. And their game against the Cardinals has given the Eagles new life. And he's playing better than Wentz. But can Wentz admit that to himself and do what's for the good of the team? I do not. I think this is going to get very ugly. I think this is going to get really interesting to look in the coming weeks for sure. So the college football playoffs announced, finally. Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Ohio State 3, and Notre Dame 4. Texas A&M was on the outside looking in at 5. I'm going to cape up for Notre Dame. For Notre Dame right here. My good friend Ben Karen, I was talking to him last night. He's in favor of A&M being in over Notre Dame. I would take Notre Dame. And here's the reason. I'm going to make this case. And I think it's really, really close. Really close. And at the end of the day, I want to say this too. It doesn't matter whether it's Notre Dame or Texas A&M. Both of them get the honor of getting embarrassed and undressed against Alabama in the semis, right? Like, Notre Dame got blown out by Clemson. Texas A&M, we already saw that movie with them in Alabama. So, like, the result's not going to be different. Like, it's going to be 20 to 25 points. Alabama's going to roll. So it doesn't really matter. But here's what I'll say. Notre Dame was 10-1. A&M was 8-1. Now, A&M, they play in the SEC, particularly the SEC West, the toughest conference in college football. Their loss, and the toughest division, by the way, with the SEC West, and their one loss was to Alabama. Now, here's the thing with Notre Dame. The ACC is not the SEC. I think everybody knows that. But their only loss was to Clemson with Trevor Lawrence. And Clemson with Trevor Lawrence might be good enough to beat Alabama. Like, we'll see how this all shakes out in the coming weeks, in the coming months. But I'm just going to say this. Don't be surprised if Dabo and Trevor Lawrence, what they got up there in Clemson, if they beat Alabama. So Clemson's legit. And there's no shame in getting blown out by them. Notre Dame was also in the conference championship game. Texas A&M could not be by virtue of the fact that they didn't win their division, right? Alabama was the one representing the West for the conference championship game, not A&M. And here's also the thing. Notre Dame was 2. So if you're 2, they're the number 2 team in the country coming in to the championship weekend. Number 3 was Clemson. So your 3 blows out your 2. Your 2's not going to really fall out of the top 5. Like, that's hard to imagine. Particularly if you had them 2, that means you thought of them very highly for the whole season. So if you thought of a team that highly for the season, I'm just thinking about this through the committee's eyes, then you're probably not going to drop them all the way down past 5, right? So I think that's what happened. Also, if you look at their best wins, right? You have Florida, right? A&M beat Florida. Florida lost as 3 losses. They lost to Alabama. They lost to A&M, which are not bad losses on Florida's part. They had a stinker against LSU. When Notre Dame beat Clemson, I know Trevor Lawrence and some other guys were out, but let's remember this. That Clemson team, even without Trevor Lawrence, they are elite. They are special. They are something to be reckoned with. That Clemson team, without Trevor Lawrence and those players, right, when it took everything in South Bend, Indiana, for Notre Dame to beat them. Took everything. Took 2 overtimes. That team's still top 5 country. The top 5 team in the country. So that's their best win. That's Notre Dame's best win. So maybe Notre Dame's best win is better than Texas A&M's best win. And the more I think about it, I think beating that Clemson team is better than beating Florida. I just think it is. So with all that, we're not going to see A&M in the playoffs. And Jimbo Fisher, the head coach for A&M, was kind of jockeying for this. And this is the next one we're going to get into. College football expansion. Jimbo Fisher wants it. Now, college football expansion should not happen. I'm just going to tell you really quickly. We do not need 8 teams in. Because here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. And some people might say, oh, you just put the top 8 teams in each conference. That is not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to have all the 5 Power 5 conferences. They're all going to have at-large berths. You're probably going to give a group of 5 school an at-large berth. So for the UCFs, right, the BYUs, the Cincinnati's, one of those teams is going to get an at-large berth. And then after that, 6 teams, right, that's 6. Then you're going to have, 2 wild cards. You're going to have 2 wild cards. We don't need this. Oregon won the Pac-12. Do we need this? Oregon is fraudulent as a championship team, the conference champion I've ever seen. Do we need to see Oregon versus Ohio State? Do we really need to see that just to make all these conferences happy? Life isn't fair. Like, I don't understand why these coaches and these ADs and these conference commissioners are like, oh, we need more spots. No, we don't. It's fine. The 4th game, the 1 versus 4 game historically have been blowouts. Right? We saw what LSU did to Oklahoma. We saw what Alabama did to Oklahoma. We don't need to keep seeing this. We saw what Alabama did to Michigan State. The 1 versus 4 has been lopsided. We don't need 1 versus 8. We don't need 2 versus 7. We don't. We don't need it. And I know, and I agree, I don't think it's good for college football, but this will happen. There will be expansion. Because you want to know what? I'm trying to tell you, people that are pissed off right now, people in the SEC are going to be pissed off. People in the SEC, I know they're happy Alabama got in, but they're pissed that A&M didn't get in. I guarantee you, people in the SEC, they pump their chests out and they say, we're the best conference in college football. And they're pissed that 2 ACC teams are in. So people in the SEC are not happy, right? So you got 1 angry conference. And the SEC, as powerful as we know, they just bulldozed through people saying that the season was going to get canceled because of COVID, right? And they just said, we're going to play anyway. So the SEC has a lot of power. The Pac-12. They've been left out. They're becoming an afterthought. They're not even becoming a legitimate conference. They're going to want to at-large bid to stay relevant. You know, a team like Cincinnati that has moved down the polls, right? They're like 9th. And at one point they were like 6th or 7th. And they went undefeated. So people in Cincinnati in the group of 5 schools, even with the UCF thing a couple of years ago, they're upset. So you're going to have them at the table. People in the Big 12 probably aren't thrilled, right? You know, maybe people in the Big 12 think that they're better than Notre Dame or A&M. I mean, I don't agree with that, but maybe people in the Big 12 do think that. And they can say, you know, we have Oklahoma, we have Texas. We should be in. We should get a spot. We can compete with these teams if we're in. I think the Big 10. I think the Big 10's fine. I think the Big 10's happy. But I'll also tell you this. I know for a fact, and also this is also why people in the Big 12 might not be happy. Teams like Oklahoma, Iowa State, they played all the games. Ohio State played like 6 games and they're going to get in. People will not be happy with that because the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC all took the initiative. The Big 12, the ACC, and the Big Ten, not the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC all took the initiative. So if they're all taking the initiative, yet the Big Ten that just comes up and just says, hey, we're coming in, we got Ohio State, and they get in, that's going to piss people off. So this is going to happen. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's going to be good for college football, but it will happen. Now, next up. So apparently Tyronn Lue, head coach of the Los Angeles Clippers, is saying that they're going to run triangle sets for Kawhi Leonard and make him like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. This is crazy. First of all, this isn't the issue with Kawhi. The issue for Kawhi, here are the issues for Kawhi. It is not that he needs the triangle. He's not a leader. It's the fact that he doesn't play games. It's the fact that he's not always healthy. Like, the triangle, Kawhi playing in the triangle is not going to elevate his game that much. Like, that's not the issue. If you told me Kawhi was going to talk to people, be a leader, maybe improve his passing, maybe he could work on his playmaking is probably going to be more of an asset to the team than him playing in the triangle. You don't need that. You really don't need him to be in the triangle. Like that's not the issue with Kawhi. How about Kawhi plays 70 games or whatever, how many games they're going to play this NBA season? That is going to be good for the Clippers. Not necessarily the triangle, so I just think it's misguided by Tyronn Lue. And then lastly, Giannis Antetokounmpo, I didn't talk about this last week, signs a 5-year, $228.2 million deal, Supermax, with the Bucks. Man, it is good to be honest right now. And this is good for the NBA. Because I know people were not happy with LeBron leaving Cleveland twice. People are not happy with Kevin Durant leaving the Oklahoma City Thunder. With all these stars having so much power, even what James Harden is doing in Houston right now, they're not happy. But I'll tell you this, when you have a superstar like Giannis who decides to stay in Milwaukee, that gives hope to the small organizations. And, we can do the right things. We can groom a superstar, and he will stay. Like, even look at Toronto. Toronto's a big city. Toronto's not a small city. It's an international city. And you have Kawhi Leonard, who won the championship there a couple years ago, and he decided to leave to a worse situation with the Clippers. Right? After he won the championship. So it's like, what can we do to get a star to stay? And you have Giannis, and it did not end well against the Heat in the conference semis last year. It didn't this past year. It did not end well. And despite the fact that it did not end well and he decides to stay, I think that is a win for the NBA at large and for small market teams. And also, side note, James Harden. This has to stop with James Harden. The Rockets need to trade him. If you guys saw on Twitter last week, James Harden's getting a little fat, not out of shape, very out of shape. The Rockets then leaked some stuff that apparently over the years, instead of going to practice, they would let him go to Vegas and nightclubs and strip clubs, and he didn't have to go to practice. James was just partying all the time. And James Harden was asked about it today, and he just kept saying, no comment, no comment. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better down there in Houston. Just cut bait right now and get rid of James Harden. That's what the Rockets need to do. So that's what we have for this edition of Outside the Shop. If you want to check out me and Kenny Sims' NFL recap, I'll have that posted tonight. So you can definitely check that out, and we will recap everything that happened this past week in the NFL. The Browns got a big win. The Bills are doing some stuff, so definitely check that out. And you can check that out on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, like I said, all your podcasting platforms. So thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Outside the Shop with me, your host, Daryl Lane. Have a great day and God bless.